Today, we're talking about labor burden, specifically labor burden for Hurricane Michael. And just because we're talking about Hurricane Michael doesn't mean we're talking about that only. This is just a good example of labor burden on a particular cat and how we calculate it and how we get to the numbers. The numbers, in fact, are shocking. Let's get to it. You got me feeling like, oh, she make me feel alive, make me feel alive, she make me feel alright, she makes me feel alive, make me feel alive. Till you come back home, until you come back home, until you come back home, till you come back home. So let's talk labor burden. Hurricane Michael was the strongest storm to ever hit the mainland United States. It was a Category 5 when it came in. It had an utter decimating force. About 96% of the structures, for example, in Panama City, Florida, received some form of damage. Don't know how many of those were catastrophic, but it was pretty horrible. As you move to the east a little bit into Callaway, even you move up into Mariana, you move off to the east into Mexico Beach, and even as far as Port St. Joe, you see consistent damages in the same way. What you want to know about this market in this study that we did is you want to look at just how far away certain things are. If you look at that entire 7-county area that was mainly affected, and that was affected all the way into Georgia. Just recently did a loss in Albany. And it was a pretty substantial loss. But if you look at it closely, you notice this factor in the market, in that you have this swath of 7 counties essentially right along the coast, and then over to on the west side you have Walton County, which is Santa Rosa Beach, the Funiac Springs, not very big places, and they're most of that's more of a tourist area. Then you move on to Miramar, Destin, Fort Walton Beach, Pensacola, Niceville, Crestview. All of those areas I just told you about, all of them are a good distance away from the damage zone. And at the same time, these areas, all of them, were in a sort of a housing boom right when the storm came. So that means most of your labor pool in this general area was already very well specified and contracted to do work. So that created another problem. So the first thing you've got is this distance that people have to travel in order to get housed and get back into the damage zone. You have just a sheer infrastructure problem, which also affects the movement of materials, because the movement of materials has that same problem with the logistics of moving inside and out of a market. It's just longer. For example, when contents were moved out of the market, they were forced to do long hauls. We've seen contents move to Montgomery, Atlanta, Birmingham. I think we had some in Valdosta. We've just seen them all over the place, and that's running up the cost as well. But then you've got essentially you have housing, transportation, and the cost of labor. So let's just look at what happens per market. We looked at about 121 contractors, and we basically polled all of them to pull this data together. And we found first of all in Panama City, which is the closest area that's close to reasonable housing. So in the final analysis, because of about 2 hours a day in travel, 39%, they were 39% higher cost of labor due to housing. and labor shortages. A 25% reduction in the inefficiency due to the travel time to the project. A 15% increase in operational costs due to regulatory cost and the cost of transportation. So that creates a modifier that is basically 1.79 or 79% higher than what normal prices would be. So you're 179% is the total cost. So example, recently had in Panama City, carrier offered $42,000 for a particular roof. Contractors came in at 92, 94, 98. They paid out $92,000. The roof was replaced and everything was done. But you notice 42 was probably pre-market condition and pre-cat, and that would have been an appropriate cost. But with all of these variables, boom, you better than double the cost. And that's a good example of exactly what we see over and over and over and over again. When we go to Mexico Beach, we still have a 39% higher labor cost, but we have a 37.5% reduction in the efficiency of staff because of travel time. %16 increase in operational costs due to regulatory and transportation. You're pushing out at least another hour and a half, maybe 2 hours into your trip every day for all your workers. And you still got this problem with housing them. When you get all the way out to Port St. Joe, which is out a little bit farther to the west, you get a 41% higher labor cost, 41.5% of reduction of efficiency, and 19% increase in overall operational cost. So in Port St. Joe, you're basically doubling plus some the cost of construction. In Mexico Beach, you're almost doubling it, 1.9 or so. It's a big deal. It's a big deal for a lot of reasons that are probably very obvious to you. But the biggest thing is, if we don't pay attention to these things, the insureds lose. The businesses don't open. The insureds, the owners of homes, don't get to come back. They lose their homes. They lose all their value. They lose the most important thing in their financial repertoire. And so we need to study this and know this and have it as a common thing in our industry. I do a lot of expert work around valuation of construction costs and looking at various dependencies. It's different doing construction just south of Georgia and doing construction in Soho. It's different doing it today in Panama City, just like it was different during Hurricane Irma, doing things in Fort Lauderdale. It just took a little more time, but not so drastic as this. It wasn't such a drastic increase in cost. We always see increases in cost. This is a particularly harsh, very long-running cost structure that's going to be here for a very long while. I've published a white paper on this. You can read this a little more clearly in that. I will put a link to it wherever this video happens to be posted. And if you have any questions, let me know. We are extremely thankful to the high number of our clients, friends, and colleagues that helped us with this, that gave us data and really opened their books to look at some of the hardest details. In this process, we heard some stories that were staggering. And that's one of the reasons why we did this, because we think this needs to be discussed openly and honestly, because nobody's trying to give anybody a run on this. It's just the practicality of the market. You have a great day. If you need anything at all, I'm right here.
Flight 022, turn right at 180 and maintain at 3000.